Mastering Understanding of Value Chain. Hi there! Let's get into a rabbit hole. It's actually a rabbit penthouse. On the door, a label reads Value Pricing. Behind the door, there is a maze of connections and numerous intersections of two concepts, value chain and value creation. Why am I even touching this? I'm seeing creative studios struggling with two critical concepts, positioning of their offering and value-based pricing. Both these subjects got a fair bit of exposure from experts, educators, and thought leaders, like David C. Baker, Blair Enns, or more widely, Chris Do. Yet, when you look at how it translates into business practice, oh boy! The problem boils down to the fact that ability to practically apply value-based pricing and to position your firm successfully requires a crucial ingredient. And I haven't seen this being talked about sufficiently. That missing ingredient is understanding the value chain and your place in it. What is value chain? In a nutshell, that's an entire ecosystem of connected companies working together to achieve a client's goal. Think of a client, a big corporation. Most likely, they would have their agency of record, being a partner for true success of their brand and marketing. In parallel, especially recently, there's going to be some additional smaller independent firms doing this or that. Let's say they launch a new product. There is a launch strategy, there are events, a campaign to be produced, and a TVC to be made. Following strategic development, budget allocation, and strategizing execution, the agency would hire a production house to shoot this launch film. What is a production house? Well, it's another agency, a group of people in charge of making things happen. They would hire a director, a creative director, bring together a team to shoot, service the production, bring a post house, and often specialized CG, VFX, or animation partners. Quite a lot of entities. And despite a collaborative vibe, it's a hierarchical structure, much resembling a chain of command in military. We know the drill. Where it's getting interesting is plotting these firms on a graph. Let's call it a value chain graph. We'll plot the companies there, and then we'll start switching labels. Imagine this. There's one vertical axis, and the companies occupy the space along it. Now the labels. First set, imagine strategic impact on top and creative execution on bottom. Plotting our case on this graph would look like this, top down. Client, then agency, underneath production house. Underneath the production house, you'll see a post house, a CG house, maybe a VFX company, and down the line, you'll see subcontractors and individual artists. Quite obvious, isn't it? Now, let's switch the labels. Top, high risk, high business impact. Bottom, low risk, low impact. Top, high stakes. Bottom, low stakes. On the top, lots of politics. Bottom, quite a lot of hands-on work. On top, you have full control over business model and pricing strategy. But on the bottom, this control is limited. It's a system and it's designed to produce outputs efficiently. Now imagine you're playing with this system trying to swap roles on various levels. What is the impact of each change on the entire undertaking and on specific aspects of the venture? If you look at the top, replacing an agency in charge of this big launch will yield entirely different approaches to what to do and how to launch it. Swapping a production house will still impact the outcomes big time, but the impact will be more local and definitely not that global. Then, swapping a company responsible for delivering these creative transitions between the shots, as envisioned by the director, and sitting in a broader context defined by the agency. This is going to impact a bit of creative outcome, but probably what's more important than how amazing these transitions are would be how fast, reliable, or easy to work with people from the company are. Don't rush through this. It's really worth it to explore the role play on each of the nodes. The goal is understanding a big picture of what decisions and responsibilities are taking place on each of these levels, and what defines a good choice when playing with options to fill in each of nodes. When you know where you stand in the value chain, you can start climbing to the top. Why is it important? Why am I even bringing this? Because so often I see 3D animation companies trying to position themselves as the ones solving agency problems. That's poised for failure because it establishes your positioning choices on faulty placement in the value chain. If you're a 3D animation studio, you don't compete against agencies, nor should you pretend to deliver results that are typically guaranteed by the agency. Yet so often this happens. Firms start crafting their positioning without understanding where they sit in the value chain. It's like entering a boxing ring without choosing a weight category first. On each of layers, you'll have specific amount of freedom to shape your positioning and the boundaries that are to some extent bendable. Imagine your firm caters equally towards brands, agencies, and production houses. Chances are you're guilty of something like that. But how can this work? If you want to work with brands, you're an agency competitor. And if so, good luck working with that agency. If you work for production houses, and sometimes you act like a production house, it's clearly a risk when they think about hiring you. Of course, there are situations where this is more nuanced, and you can imagine a successful business model where you work with both, but within a range of limitations and caveats. The value chain we plotted here is just an example. There are so many different options depending on where you are and who you care about. Once you have a good understanding of where you want to sit in the value chain, you can start thinking about how to create value and differentiation. If you're working as a CG studio in the ecosystem that we just plotted, it makes absolutely zero sense to advertise your strategic prowess. That's simply not your job. You don't need it, nor do your clients. And if you have it, and you try to geek out, you'll likely put yourself into troubles. The same goes if you try to position yourself as a partner to another, more established CG studio. You can build a thriving business working for the bigger guns like yourself, but the game you play is a vendor game with its own challenges and possible wins. Stepping up in the value chain. But if you're a CG studio and think about serving smaller firms directly, it's virtually impossible to get signed for a good deal if you don't mix in some creative strategy and a business mindset, unless you work as an execution arm to their internal marketing team. Stop selling CG. Instead, think about how your CG could fuel business goals of the client. The leap from vendor to strategic partner is paved with shared goals and shared successes. Stop selling art, start selling impact. Value-based pricing. Now that you have a bit of feeling about how this works, let's think about the idea of value pricing. So many people get that wrong. Value pricing isn't just about charging more, it's about charging right. Back to our TVC example. As a CG firm supporting a post house, working for a production house hired by an agency, you have very little chance to apply value-based pricing in practice. Why is it so? Simply because you're operating within a narrow field of expertise, and your positive impact on the business result is rather low. Let's think about this question. What barriers exist in your current business model that prevent us from adopting a value-based pricing strategy? Well, the producers will likely ask you for a sort of a budget that looks either as time and material sheet, or at best, it will be a list of deliverables with price next to each line item. That makes sense. That's how the system works. And you can't really have a true value conversation with a production house producer. What specific outcomes do we influence for our clients? And how can we measure and communicate this impact? Side note, while your positive business impact is limited, your negative impact is potentially high, because if you underdeliver, the entire thing collapses. This is exactly why, if you want this kind of jobs, you play on the security of hiring you. So, when would it make any sense to even think about value pricing? A rule of thumb should be the closer to the client you are, and the more business impact is at stake, the more sense it makes to talk value. In what ways can we move from being seen as a cost to an investment? How can we reframe our client conversations to focus on business outcomes rather than just creative output? Does it mean that being on the bottom, on the execution side, is a bad business positioning? By no means. You can build an empire there and have a fairly profitable business, provided that you understand clearly the game you play and the dynamics. And the game to master is operations and efficiency. How can firms at the execution level differentiate their services to create more value? Let's talk about differentiation quickly. Once you positioned yourself on the value chain map, it's time to look around. How does our current position in the value chain limit or enhance our pricing power? Who are you competing against? What are the people hiring you and your competitors selecting for? What are their personal and professional motivations? And what is the leeway they have in the system with respect to types of firms they can work with? To position yourself well, you need to do two things. First, you need to sleep with your clients. That is, understand exactly the environment they operate in, the values they seek, and understand what choices they have. You don't do that by hiring a copywriter, opening a thesaurus, and coming up with some fancy word for the same thing. As I always say, positioning is not a copywriting problem. It's a business strategy domain. Only from that deep and intimate understanding of the environment, you can craft a compelling value proposition. Your creativity has a direct line to their bottom line. Map it, show it, price it. This insight is not about the definitive answers. It's about setting a good perspective to approach the subjects of positioning, value creation, and value pricing. Let's think about further explorations and questions you'd like to ask yourself. First, strategic position versus operational execution. Where does your firm fall on this spectrum? How does this influence your client engagements and pricing models? How directly does your work impact your client's bottom line or strategic goals? How integrated are your services with the core operations or success of your clients? What innovative pricing or service models can better align your firm's capabilities with market opportunity? How can shifting from a vendor to a partnership model transform client relationships and business outcomes? Hey, give me a shout if these subjects resonate with you, and let me know where you are on your value creation and positioning path. Shall we dive deeper into theory? Maybe you'd like to take part in a mastermind around this subject. Or maybe you need one-on-one help. Stay prolific until the next one. Thank you for listening to the Future Crafting Thoughtcast, insights into leading, building, and evolving B2B brands in tech and creative sectors. Coming at you from Patrick Kisney, the fast thinker, entrepreneur, and advisor to audacious venture founders.